To Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania, summer of 2017. The Delaware River cuts through Bucks County in a long green corridor, and along its bank runs River Road, a narrow stretch of pavement that outsiders rarely travel. At house number 1050 lives, Michael McNew. He's 64, a district sales manager for the pharmaceutical company AbbVie, a senior position, regular business trips, responsibility for a large regional division. His home is his own, well put together, grown up. You can see the house of a man whose life has already settled into shape. McNew lives alone. Behind him is a marriage he left long ago, grown children, the ordinary American path of a middle-ranking executive who's climbed to the top shelf of his profession. Neighbors describe him the same way every time. Calm, polite, not the argumentative type, not loud, helpful with small things. His passion is motorcycles. He knows his way around the machines. He moves in biker circles. Every so often he disappears on long rides through the neighboring states. This hobby will define the circle of people who will be tied to the last 2 years of his life. On August 6, 2017, something happens inside McNew's house that won't be discovered until 2 days later. On August 8th, his AbbVie colleague Mary Ann Shockley drives out to River Road. McNew hasn't come to work and isn't answering calls, which isn't like him. She's the one who finds him inside his own house. The owner of the home is dead. The rooms aren't fully turned over, but the scene shows haste. The victim's pockets are pulled inside out, as though someone had grabbed everything within reach in a hurry. 2 specific things are missing from the house: a laptop and a mobile phone. Exactly the items where a grown man's correspondence lives: his transfers, his connections, his private conversations. The first picture reads in a familiar way. Someone got in, ran into the owner, took the valuable electronics, and the owner didn't survive the encounter. Bucks County is used to different news: traffic, school board meetings, petty theft. The death of a senior pharmaceutical manager in a quiet corridor along the river instantly becomes a loud story, and almost immediately the question arises: was this really a random robbery? Or is the scene arranged so that whoever arrives will believe it was? The answer to that question doesn't start forming from the footprints on the floor. It starts with who had been standing next to McNew for the past 2 years. Standing next to him was Jennifer Lynn Morrissey, 33 years old, described by herself and by people around him as his fiancée. They'd known each other for about 2 years. Their engagement was being discussed in their close circle. She was often at his house. She had her own access, her own things, her own place in his daily life. The couple looks unequal before anyone has even said the word unequal out loud. McNew is more than 3 decades older than Morrissey. He's an established executive with a steady income, a credit history, a stable retirement ahead. She comes from a completely different world. Morrissey works as a mechanic at a motorcycle shop. She knows engines and frames, and in an earlier period of her life, she earned money as a dancer in clubs. What brings them together is motorcycles, a shared subject, a shared language, a shared crowd. McNew is generous with her. He pays the big bills, gives her gifts, helps her financially in situations she couldn't handle on her own, openly talks to those around him about the wedding. For a man of his age and position, this looks like a late-stage choice, not to build an empire, but to close a personal chapter next to one specific person. But Morrissey's life has a second center of gravity, and either McNew doesn't know the full truth about it, or he doesn't know it in the right proportions. That center is Charles Kulo, nicknamed Ruthless. Kulo is the leader of a regional chapter of the motorcycle club, The Breed, a man from a closed subculture with its own internal rules. Morrissey keeps a close relationship with him, in parallel with the engagement. These 2 lines, the calm pharmaceutical manager and the biker leader, exist in her life at the same time. The question isn't whether this is possible. The question is how long a setup like this can hold under the weight, and what will happen if one of the people in it decides it's time to change the arrangement. The knot that will later pull the whole structure down takes shape before the shot is ever fired. It takes shape on paper and in insurance company archives. In the same period in which Morrissey is simultaneously engaged to McNew and involved with Kulo, life insurance policies are being written in McNew's name. There are 2 of them. Jennifer Morrissey is listed as the beneficiary on both. The total payout in the event of the insured's death exceeds $360,000. This isn't a symbolic policy or a routine formality. For someone with her income and background, this is a sum capable of fully rewriting her financial reality. The policies are drawn up and renewed in the months leading up to August of 2017. That is, exactly at the point when McNew sees her as his future wife and not a possible threat. A life insurance policy in favor of a partner proves nothing on its own. Thousands of American couples do exactly this. Spouses write policies on each other. Parents write them on themselves for their children. It's a basic part of adult financial planning, especially for people closer to 60. As long as we're only talking about the paperwork, these documents look like responsible preparation for a shared future. That's the particular nature of evidence that turns into evidence only in hindsight. It doesn't shout at the moment it appears. It sits quietly in an archive, waiting for the event to which it will later be attached. After August 6, 2017, these two policies stop being an element of financial tidiness and become the first economic knot for investigators. One specific person now has a measurable financial interest directly connected to McNew's fate. So far, no one is saying this out loud. The insurance agent isn't calling the police. The documents aren't marked with a red flag. But the number already exists. $360,000 is a price that will come up again and again in the case file. And the question still hanging in the air is whether these policies will stay a formal biographical detail or turn into physical evidence of motive. Running parallel to these papers is a completely different, unofficial layer of life. Text messages, Morrissey and Kulo exchange messages almost every day. At first, the tone looks ordinary. Short phrases, daily details, plans to meet, reminders about small things. Nothing that would stand out from the millions of similar conversations sitting in other people's phones. A few weeks before August 6th, the tone changes. The messages become more frequent, denser, more direct. The case file will later document more than 90 short text messages between these two numbers during the critical period. By volume, that's no longer correspondence between two friends. It's a steady working stream in which the two participants are in constant contact. In normal relationships, such a peak spike usually ties to a big event, a wedding, a move, an illness. A big event is being prepared here too, only it's of a different kind. McNew starts appearing in the messages more and more often, not as a person to chat about, but as a task, as a problem, as an element whose presence gets in the way of their shared logic. His house on River Road is discussed, his work schedule, his absences at certain hours, his financial picture. This isn't a conversation about a third person anymore. It's planning around a third person. Among these messages, there's one line that will later become one of the most quoted in the case. Kulo writes about McNew in hunting terms, using a metaphor that refers to a successful deer hunt. The phrasing is harsh and specific. It can't be brushed off as a joke. It's embedded in a context where they're already discussing the habits and schedule of a particular man. The words themselves aren't a crime. People say plenty of things in private that they later regret, and the court understands that. At the moment they're sent, no outsider reads them. They sit in device memory and in carrier server logs. And the question that usually separates empty anger from action remains: what out of this correspondence will stay words, and what will turn into an act tomorrow? The move from words to action happens on August 6th, 2017. Someone outside the household enters the house on River Road. McNew is inside at that moment. He isn't expecting danger. The house stands on a quiet corridor. The front door is not a fortress wall. It's an ordinary home belonging to an ordinary manager. Michael McNew sustains a fatal wound. Examiners later established the characteristics of what happened. It all took place at very close range, practically point blank. This is not a random episode and not the outcome of a chaotic struggle. The actions of the other person at the scene look collected and directed. The angle of the wound will later become one of the central details for the medical examiners. It doesn't match what you usually see in a disordered fight. After that, a second, equally important part of the events plays out inside the house. Traces are left at the scene that are meant to read as a robbery. The victim's pockets are turned out, as if the attacker grabbed everything the owner had on him on the way past. It isn't random expensive trinkets or jewelry or cash from a drawer that disappears from the house. What goes missing is specific: McNew's laptop and his mobile phone. These are exactly the two things that store everything that might otherwise become evidence against the people close to him. Work correspondence, personal messages, saved documents, call history, insurance company apps, financial interfaces. Taking precisely these items isn't the behavior of a random thief who stopped by just to try his luck. A thief would take what's easiest to sell. Here they took what's dangerous to leave behind. The scene is put together so that the officers arriving in the first hours will believe in a quick break-in. Turned out pockets, missing electronics, a single victim in an empty house. Visually, everything fits with a robbery gone wrong. The question is how sturdy this staging is, and which of its details won't hold up under a careful second look. That second look is still ahead. For now, the Bucks County Police show up at River Road. They document a picture they've seen in dozens of other cases. A front door with no obvious demonstrative break-in, a victim inside, electronics gone, pockets turned out. The working theory of the first 24 hours takes shape quickly. Home invasion, a robbery with a fatal outcome. This logic explains almost everything the eye can see. It explains why the laptop and phone are missing. They were taken as valuables. It explains the turned-out pockets. The attacker was in a hurry. It explains the lone victim, McNew, lived alone. An outsider could have learned that without much trouble. And a quiet house by the river could easily look like a convenient target. At the public level, the story in those first days sounds exactly that way. An older pharma manager became the random victim of a high-risk break-in. Morrissey is spoken to during the same period. She talks to investigators as a close person who has just lost her partner. She says she wasn't at the house at the moment of the death, gives the place where she says she was, describes an ordinary day. Her version is neatly fitted into the overall picture, the fiancé who happened not to be there, and whose world has just collapsed. At this stage, she's not formally a suspect. In the case, her status sounds different. A close acquaintance of the victim, someone who can help the investigation reconstruct the last hours and weeks of McNew's life. They listen to her, record her statement, give her time to absorb the first shock. All of this is standard procedure for handling people close to the victim in situations like this. In parallel, the investigators set the usual machinery in motion, canvassing the neighbors on both sides of River Road. Did anyone hear a shot? Did anyone see a vehicle? Requests to companies operating the nearest surveillance cameras and traffic recorders. Work with mobile carriers on the cell towers in the area of the house during the relevant window. Everything moves along the standard arc. The only question is what will crack first in this smooth story. Once the technical review starts landing on top of the words. What cracks first is not a witness and not a neighbor's recording. What first stops matching the robbery version is the medical examination. The character of McNew's wound fits poorly into the scenario of a chaotic attack. The medical examiner describes what happened as a contact episode. The distance was minimal. That means the second person at the scene was not in the hallway, not behind a door, not at the distance of a frightened stranger. He was standing close, right next to him. That kind of behavior implies calm and confidence that there won't be any reaction from the other side. On top of that, come additional signs. Taken together, the examiners conclude that the victim was most likely in a relaxed posture at that moment, for instance, talking with someone he trusted. This isn't the picture of a man who has just collided with a stranger in his own front hall. The usual reaction to a sudden attack is different. A person turns, tries to shield himself with his arms, steps back. The traces you'd expect are also different, smeared, chaotic, with signs of a struggle. Here, there simply aren't signs of a struggle at the level you'd need. There's no overturned furniture on a scale that would confirm a collision. There are no characteristic marks you normally see from attempts at self-defense. Everything happened fast and in a directed way. Taken as a whole, this set of signs turns the theory in a different direction. To the examiner, it looks more like a planned act than a sudden encounter. The attacker was either familiar with McNew or was brought into the house by someone McNew didn't fear. Detectives start asking questions that a simple robbery story can no longer answer. The answer to those new questions, as happens more and more often in modern cases, starts coming together not from a neighbor's statement and not from a stranger's face on a camera. It comes together from a signal that passed through the home network on River Road that day. In modern homes, every Wi-Fi router keeps its own quiet diary. It doesn't record video and it doesn't record audio, but it logs service events that later often turn out to be more precise than any witness statement. Every device that has connected to this network before remembers its name and password. As soon as a phone comes within range of a familiar router, it automatically, without the owner doing anything, tries to connect. According to investigators, that's exactly what happens on the day of the events on River Road. Jennifer Morrissey's phone shows up in the logs of McNew's home network. It connects automatically, like any phone that has been in this house more than once. This isn't a recording of her voice. It isn't someone's story. It isn't a conveniently placed neighbor's camera. This is a cold technical mark on the server side. The time of this connection fundamentally doesn't line up with the alibi she gave investigators during the first 24 hours. She said she hadn't been at the house during the critical hours and was in a completely different location. Meanwhile, her phone registers her device within range of McNew's home network at exactly the time when, by her own account, she couldn't have been there. The key feature of this kind of trace is that a phone doesn't know how to play along with its owner. It doesn't care which version of events the person has, what their plans are, what they're afraid of. It just searches for a familiar network and logs the fact of connection. The auto-connect algorithm isn't capable of taking into account that on this particular day, it might be more convenient for its owner to leave a different trace, or none at all. From this point on, the logic of the investigation shifts. The version about a random robber from nowhere steps back. The version about a planned act moves to the front, involving not a crowd of random people, but specific figures who had reasons to be at the house and a motive to finish something there. The investigator's attention turns to whoever, by connections and correspondence, is closest to the point on River Road. The closest person to that point after Morrissey herself is Charles Kulo. And once investigators get access to the correspondence, the case turns from a scatter of fragments into a coherent text that can be read from beginning to end. The prosecution collects more than 90 short messages between Morrissey and Kulo for the period before August 6th. Technically, that's an ordinary volume for two close people in regular contact. In content, it's far more than ordinary daily noise. Two parallel conversations are running inside these messages at once. The first is everyday. Meetups, trips, the small items of a shared life, back and forth remarks. All the stuff that makes two people not just acquaintances, but a pair used to staying in touch. That layer on its own doesn't compromise anyone. People text a lot, and there's nothing illegal about that. The second conversation runs underneath the first and occasionally breaks through. It's the strategic layer. It's about McNew, his habits, his movements, his schedule, his house, his money. Some fragments read like reconnaissance of the territory. When he's alone, when he comes back, how the house is laid out. Against the backdrop of warm, everyday messages, these pieces stand out with hard specificity. This is where the hunting phrasing from Kulo, mentioned earlier, shows up. In the courtroom, it's read out together with the rest of the messages, not as a separate quote. On its own, it isn't yet a confession to a crime. People say plenty of things in emotional exchanges. But in combination with the rest, with the discussion of the house, the habits, the insurance, with the digital trace and the Wi-Fi, it reads completely differently. The correspondence turns two acquaintances into a pair with a shared goal. And that goal doesn't coexist well with the life of a third person. For the prosecution, this becomes an anchor. Now there's not only a scene and device marks, but also a conversation in which intent is recorded long before the shot. What remains is to find traces of execution beyond words. The traces of execution lead the investigation away from screens and back to the ground. Officers get information about a possible location where McNew's missing items, the laptop, and mobile phone could have ended up. Those same items whose disappearance on August 6th was supposed to confirm the robbery version. The search point turns out not to be a forest or a random dump. It turns out to be a specific address. The home of Charles Kulo's mother. In the ground of that home's yard, buried items are discovered. Upon examination, they turn out to be the laptop and mobile phone missing from River Road. The same devices that, on the night after August 6th, by the logic of the staged robbery, should have been put up for resale or stripped for parts. Instead, they end up in the ground next to a home directly connected to Kulo. This fact on its own is worth more than many circumstantial clues. A random thief doesn't drive stolen electronics to the other end of the county and doesn't bury them in the yard of the mother of a motorcycle club leader. That route and that storage place have no everyday explanation. They have only one explanation, an attempt to get items out of sight whose contents are dangerous for specific people. The devices are recovered and sent to forensic experts for data recovery. Even if part of the information has been wiped, analysts can bring back correspondence, files, app histories, geolocation, McNew's laptop, his phone, his personal communication channels. All of it turns from missing electronics into a direct source of evidence in the case of his death. The staging that was meant to steer the story toward a random robbery now works against its authors. Items whose disappearance was needed as camouflage have been caught in someone else's yard, tied to Kulo's and Morrissey's circle, and they begin to speak the language of data. What remains is to understand what exactly they'll say, and whether the investigation can turn this find from a strong lead into a proven episode that will hold up in a courtroom. The data from the buried devices form one part of the evidentiary base, but gradually another voice is added to it, and that voice comes not from a technical report, but from a pretrial detention cell. By this point, Morrissey is already in custody. In the American system, for defendants in serious cases, waiting for trial often happens in conditions where a shared cell is the norm. According to the investigation, one of Morrissey's cellmates tells officers that Morrissey described details of her involvement in what happened. The conversations happen informally, between ordinary daily moments, and according to the witness, include things that have not yet surfaced in the public part of the investigation. The cellmate's testimony becomes part of the prosecution's evidentiary base. In parallel, in the public part of the trial, a nickname tied to Morrissey in connection with this case surfaces. The phrase is "Sug Slayer." It directly refers to her relationship with McNew and to the substance of the charge. Sug was the short form she used for her partner, who coined the nickname, and the exact context in which it was spoken differs across sources. The data are contradictory, and within the trial itself, this label plays a more symbolic role. The defense responds to this whole line with something that sounds often in American practice. The testimony of cellmates in principle requires caution. Such witnesses frequently have their own interests, a reduction of their own sentence, conditions of detention, other levers. The court takes these motives into account. In this trial, however, the testimony doesn't remain the prosecution's only anchor. It lands on top of an already assembled picture rather than replacing it. For the jury, this matters. They hear not a lone voice from the next cell over, but a coherent account in which the Wi-Fi logs, the correspondence, the buried devices, the insurance policies, and a word spoken in jail come together in a single line. The question heading into the finale of the trial sounds different by now. Will the whole of this structure hold up in a courtroom? The trial of Jennifer Morrissey takes place in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. By the start of the hearings, the prosecution has exactly what it worked for, nearly 2 years to build. The prosecutors construct their argument around 4 supports. The first support is the correspondence. More than 90 short messages between Morrissey and Kulo, gathered into a coherent document in which the everyday layer flows into discussion of McNew and planning around him. The second support is the digital trace, her phone automatically connecting to McNew's home network at a time when, by her own version, she should not have been there. The third support is the buried devices, found in the yard of Kulo's mother's house, the laptop and phone, whose disappearance was supposed to prop up the robbery version. The fourth support is the cellmate's testimony, which lies on top of this technical picture and adds a witness layer. To these 4 supports, the prosecution attaches the economic motive. 2 life insurance policies totaling more than $360,000, beneficiary Morrissey. The prosecutor emphasizes, one specific person had a measurable financial interest tied directly to McNew's fate. The defense builds its strategy from the opposite direction. Its main argument is that each link, taken separately, is weak. The correspondence is words, not action. The Wi-Fi connection is a technical accident. A phone can catch a network from a neighboring lot. The devices were found not with the defendant, but in the yard of someone else's house. No weapon was recovered from her. The cellmate's testimony is a classic vulnerable witness with her own agenda. Individually, the defense argues, none of this is a verdict. Together, it insists, this is a mosaic and not proof. On February 1st, 2019, the jury returns its decision. They find Morrissey guilty of first-degree murder. On March 1st, 2019, the judge announces the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is the maximum available in this case in Pennsylvania, short of the death penalty. The courtroom records the finale in which the former fiancée of a pharmaceutical executive will not be coming back to her old life. The sentence of March 1st, 2019, doesn't automatically become the end of the story. The defense files an appeal both against the sentence itself and against the conduct of the trial, how specific pieces of evidence were admitted, how the jury instructions sounded, how the jailhouse witnesses' testimony was weighed. In the American system, this is a standard step for cases where the stake is life in prison. On March 17, 2021, the appeals court denies the appeal. The verdict in Morrissey's case is left in force. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole becomes the final judicial frame of her life. The defense still has further procedural options, which in cases like this can stretch out over years, but the basic structure of the case is locked in at this stage. Separately, in the shadow of this story, stands the figure of Charles Culo. His correspondence with Morrissey is one of the supports of the prosecution's case. His role in the planning is clearly traceable through the messages. His mother's house is where the missing devices were buried. The connection between him and the events on River Road is strong and multi-layered. At the same time, Culo's full legal fate is described contradictorily in open sources. And here, we have to say honestly, the data are contradictory, and part of his story remains outside the focus of the public process. The McNew case itself has been covered by major documentary productions. Dateline, 2020, and American Greed have all done pieces on it, and regional Pennsylvania outlets have reconstructed the timeline in detail. On the level of professional practice, the case is gradually becoming one of the textbook examples of how staging a robbery collapses under the weight of digital traces, home network logs, correspondence, recovered data from found devices. The central question of the story received its answer in the courtroom, but some of the dark zones, the exact role of the other participants, the full mechanics of the shot, the authorship and context of the nickname, remain without a final word. What began as an engagement, motorcycles and insurance policies ended with a verdict that doesn't bring anyone back to the life that existed before August 6, 2017. This story remains a warning about how digital traces always write their own version of events, regardless of the story the people involved are telling.